voice that it was a pimple, and begged the ghost to lead him where he would. "You recollect the way?" inquired the spirit. "Remember it," cried Scrooge with fervor. "I could walk it blindfold." "Strange to have forgotten it for so many years," observed the ghost. "Let us go on." I love that moment because Scrooge, of course, cannot admit to having like a tiny tear in his eye. He's not, we wouldn't say that he's like incredibly well connected with his emotions, but whatever. They walked along the road, Scrooge recognizing every gate and post and tree, until a little market town appeared in the distance, with its bridge, its church, and winding river. Some shaggy ponies were now seen trotting towards them with boys upon their backs, who called to other boys in country gigs and carts driven by farmers. All these boys were in great spirits and shouted to each other until the broad fields were so full of merry music that the crisp air laughed to hear it. "These are but shadows of the things that have been," said the ghost. "They have no consciousness of us." The jocund travelers came on, and as they came, Scrooge knew and named them every one. Why was he rejoiced beyond all bounds to see them? Why did his cold eye glisten and his heart leap up as they went past? Why was he filled with gladness when he heard them give each other Merry Christmas as they parted at crossroads and byways for their several homes? What was Merry Christmas to Scrooge out upon Merry Christmas? What good had it ever done to him? Just a side note on the narration. First of all, jocund is a fantastic word. It's a very Shakespearean word. You hear it in Romeo and Juliet. It just means happy. These are happy travelers. And also, the narrator is pretty sarcastic, and he gives us a very biting commentary as he tells us the story. But when he's at his most biting is when he is kind of sarcastically spewing Scrooge's words back to him. And we'll see him do that throughout the story. So this business about, out upon Merry Christmas, these are the very words that Scrooge said to his nephew earlier. All right, returning to the story. "The school is not quite deserted," said the ghost. "A solitary child, neglected by his friends, is left there still." Scrooge said he knew it, and he sobbed. They left the high road by a well-remembered lane, and soon approached a mansion of dull red brick with a little weathercock-surmounted cupola on the roof and a bell hanging in it. It was a large house, but one of broken fortunes, for the spacious offices were little used. Their walls were damp and mossy, their windows broken, their gates decayed. Fowls clucked and strutted in the stables, and the coach houses and sheds were overrun with grass. Nor was it more retentive of its ancient state within, for entering the dreary hall and glancing through the open doors of many rooms, they found them poorly furnished, cold, and vast. There was an earthy savor in the air, a chilly bareness in the place which associated itself somehow with too much getting up by candlelight and not too much to eat. They went, the ghost and Scrooge, across the hall to a door at the back of the house. It opened before them and disclosed a long, bare, melancholy room, made barer still by lines of plain deal forms and desks. At one of these, a lonely boy was reading near a feeble fire, and Scrooge sat down upon a form and wept to see his poor, forgotten self as he used to be. Not a latent echo in the house, not a squeak and scuffle from the mice behind the paneling, not a drip from the half-thawed waterspout in the dull yard behind, not a sigh among the leafless boughs of one despondent poplar, not the idle swinging of an empty storehouse door, no, not a clicking in the fire, but fell upon the heart of Scrooge with a softening influence and gave a freer passage to his tears. This is just a very poignant and lovely passage. First of all, Dickens gives us this picture of a school. So, the boys who are at this school, they're at a high enough socioeconomic level that their parents can afford to send them off to school. And the building at one point was a mansion, but all of the details that he gives us, this is a mansion that's down on its luck. This is not a wealthy school, and these aren't wealthy kids, but they're happy kids. The kids that we saw, going home on their Christmas break, those are the kids in the school. The only one who is left is, of course, tiny kid Scrooge. And again, there was this really, really lovely meditation on all of the different sounds that he hears, the tree and the squeaking and the dripping of the water. And it's the first sign that he has of opening up a little bit. The spirit touched him on the arm and pointed to his younger self, intent upon his reading. Suddenly, a man in foreign garments, wonderfully real and distinct to look at, stood outside the window with an axe stuck in his belt, leading by the bridle an ass laden with wood. "Why, it's Ali Baba!" Scrooge exclaimed in ecstasy. "It's dear old honest Ali Baba. Yes, I know. One Christmas time, when yonder solitary child was left here all alone, he did come for the first time, just like that." "Poor boy, and Valentine," said Scrooge, "and his wild brother Orson. There they go." Okay, just going to interject real quickly. What's happening here is that there's Scrooge, who is, alive and in the present, the ghost of Christmas past, and they are in the past, and they're seeing Kid Scrooge. Kid Scrooge can't see him because he's a shadow of the past. Kid Scrooge is reading, and he's so immersed into his book that he has kind of like manifested the characters in the book from his imagination. So present Scrooge can see, come to life the characters that Kid Scrooge is reading about, but Kid Scrooge can't read any of them. That's why it's like a jumble of all these different characters. Okay. And his wild brother Orson, there they go. And what's his name, who was put down in his drawers asleep at the gates of Damascus? Don't you see him? And the Sultan's groom turned upside down by the genie. There he is upon his head. Serve him right. I'm glad of it. What business had he to be married to the princess? To hear Scrooge expending on all the earnestness of his nature on such subjects, in a most extraordinary voice between laughing and crying, and to see his heightened and excited face, would have been a surprise to his business friends in the city indeed. "There's the parrot!" cried Scrooge. "Green body and yellow tail, with a thing like a lettuce growing out of the top of his head. There he is. Poor Robin Crusoe, he called him, when he came home again after sailing round the island. Poor Robin Crusoe, where you been, Robin Crusoe? The man thought he was dreaming, but he wasn't. Is a parrot, There goes Friday, running for his life to the little creek. Hello, hup, hello!" Then, with a rapidity of transition very foreign to his usual character, he said, in pity for his former self, "Poor boy," and cried again. "I wish," Scrooge muttered, putting his hand in his pocket and looking about him after drying his eyes with his cuff. "But it's too late now." "What is the matter?" asked the spirit. "Nothing," said Scrooge, "nothing. There was a boy singing a Christmas carol at my door last night. I should have liked to have given him something, that's all." The ghost smiled thoughtfully and waved its hand, saying as it did so, "Let us see another Christmas." Scrooge's former self grew larger at the words, and the room became a little darker and more dirty. The panels shrank, the windows cracked, fragments of plaster fell out of the ceiling, and the naked laughs were shown instead. But how all this was brought about, Scrooge knew no more than you do. He only knew that it was quite correct, that everything had happened so, that there he was alone again, when all the other boys had gone home for the jolly holidays. He was not reading now, but walking up and down despairingly. Scrooge looked at the ghost, and with a mournful shaking of his head, glanced anxiously towards the door. It opened, and a little girl, not much younger than the boy, came darting in, and putting her arms about his neck and often kissing him, addressed him as her dear, dear brother. So we're still in the past, but we jumped forward a little bit, and here we have kind of, the equivalent of middle school age Scrooge. "I have come to bring you home, dear brother," said the child, clapping her tiny hands and bending down to laugh. "To bring you home, home, home." "Home, little Fan," returned the boy. "Yes," said the child, brimful of glee. "Home for good and all. Home for ever and ever. Father is so much kinder than he used to be that home's like heaven. He spoke so gently to me one dear night when I was going to bed that I was not afraid to ask him once more if you might come home, and he said, 'Yes, you should,' and sent me in a coach to bring you. And you were to be a man," said the child, opening her eyes, "and you are never to come back here. But first, we're to be together all the Christmas long and have the merriest time in all the world." "You're quite a little woman, Fan," exclaimed the boy. She clapped her hands and laughed and tried to touch his head, but being too little, laughed again, and stood on tiptoe to embrace him. Then she began to drag him in her childish eagerness toward the door, and he, nothing loth to go, accompanied her. Okay, little Fan is too little to understand what's happening, but basically his parents are pulling him out of school. We don't know why. It could be because they don't want to pay for it anymore. It could be because they don't have the money to pay for it anymore. All we know up until this point is that Kid Scrooge's parents leave him there at the school alone for multiple Christmases, and that he's now no longer going to get to go to school. That's the end of his education. So presumably, when she says, and you're to be a man, that really translates into like, this is the end of your education. Now you're going into the working world. So it's happy news for Fan because she's little, she's young, she's naive, but it's actually, it's quite sad. A terrible voice in the hall cried, "Bring down Master Scrooge's box there." And in the hall appeared the schoolmaster himself, who glared on Master Scrooge with a ferocious condescension and threw him into the dreadful state of mind by shaking hands with him. He then conveyed him and his sister into the veriest well of a shivering best parlor that ever was seen, where the maps upon the wall and the celestial and terrestrial globes in the windows were waxy with cold. Here he produced a decanter of curiously light wine and a block of curiously heavy cake, and administered installments of these dainties to the young people, at the same time sending out a meager servant to offer a glass of something to the postboy, who answered that he thanked the gentleman, but if it was the same tap as he had tasted before, he'd rather not. Master Scrooge's trunk being by this time tied on the top of the chaise, the children bade the schoolmaster goodbye right willingly, and getting into it, drove gaily down the garden sweep, the quick wheels dashing the hoarfrost and snow from off the dark leaves of the evergreens like spray. Just very quickly, this is it's just always funny in 19th century novels. People are constantly offering wine and alcohol to children. Oh, I guess, okay, right, I'm terrible. That's not funny at all. But the joke here in Dickens' text is that it's not that the adult, and in fact the schoolmaster, is offering the children alcohol. It's that that he's being cheap about it, that he's watered down the wine. It's just very jarring for a modern reader. Okay. "Always a delicate creature whom a breath might have withered," said the ghost. "But she had a large heart." "So she had," cried the Scrooge. "You're right. I will not gainsay it, Spirit. God forbid." "She died a woman," said the ghost, "and had, as I think, children." "One child," Scrooge returned. "True," said the ghost. "Your nephew." Scrooge seemed uneasy in his mind, and answered briefly, "Yes." Although they had but at that moment left the school behind them, they were now in the busy thoroughfares of a city. Actually, before moving on, it's just terrible, because now we know that Kid Scrooge did have somebody that he was close to, the little sister. And it's obvious that the little sister adored him and that he adored the little sister, and they had a close relationship. And that one child that she had has to be the nephew from the first day, the nephew that he refused to go to dinner with. So he doesn't say it there, but this is obviously giving him pause, that this is how he's treated the only son of his beloved little sister. I think this is actually a good stopping place for this episode. So I'm going to stop right there, and I will see you next time.